In this session, we are going to learn about what is AWS App Runner. We are going to create Node.js Microservice with the help of Node.js Express framework, and then we are going to add Github Actions into that Node.js Microservice code in order to get it deployed into the AWS App Runner. So before we start, you should have AWS account for sure, and then you should also have GitHub account so that you can have that repository created within the GitHub, and the code, whatever code you are writing for Node.js service, you are going to push that code into the GitHub account, and then the pipeline will get triggered and the code will get created, the image will get created out of the code and gets deployed into the App Runner. So all these things are going to cover as part of this exercise. So let's get started. So before we start on explaining what is Node.js and how do we create Node.js service in order to get it deployed into the AWS App Runner, I would like to take a step back and try to understand what is AWS App Runner. Okay, so AWS App Runner is a fully managed service to deploy containerized solutions or websites or apps with smaller loads into the AWS environment. Okay, so you just have to worry about creating the code and getting it deployed, and that's it. And rest of the things is taken care by AWS App Runner. You just have to tweak few configurations within it, and you are good to go. So AWS App Runner will take care of the scaling, will take care of the observability, metrics, logging, etc. basis on whatever you configure. But here the configuration is very minimalistic. You just have to tweak few configurations and the service is up. Okay, you can also pause the service in between and resume the service as and when you require. Okay, so it's a good service to start with. So I would say that the startup can make use of this service in order to get their things deployed instead of actually going to the route of using EKS or any managed Kubernetes solutions, right? So they can leverage this service. But yes, I would say that AWS App Runner as of now is not in Indian region, or there are limited set of regions in which this service is available. So sooner or later it will be available across the regions. But yes, so since it is not available in Indian region, so we will be using the Northeast region here in order to get things done. Okay, so this is about AWS App Runner. So let's talk about the workflow that I have in this diagram. So here on the left hand side we have developer, like we people who are writing the code and pushing the code into the GitHub repo, and on the right hand side we have the users of this App Runner service who are going to use it. Okay, so developer make changes into the code and push the code into the GitHub repo, and then it will get, the GitHub actions will get triggered, like basically the workflow will get triggered based on the GitHub events you configured, and then after triggering it will build and deploy the Node.js service as an image into the AWS ECR, and then this AWS App Runner will pull that image from the ECR based on the role that we have configured, and then the AWS App Runner will publish the URL for the end users to use. Now it is up to us to configure it as a public or private URL. Like if you want to use it within the AWS environment, you can have it configured as private. Otherwise, you can have it public by default, and then users can make use of this service. Like you can have it published, and there is no need to configure explicitly any load balancer or any like scaling groups, etc. So everything is baked in by AWS. So yes, it's a cool service to use. So let's get on the board with the Node.js code and see how we have achieved it. So let us have a walkthrough of the Node.js service code. How do we build it with the use of Express framework? And then we talk about the GitHub actions that we have added over here. Okay, so what is this Node.js service? This is a very simple Node.js service with Express as a library over here, and which will help us create the REST API on top of Node.js service. And then we just added one API over here, which is actually the user API to get the users. So what we did, we have a controller, and the controller is making a call to the service, user service, and user service is giving us a fake set of users from the in-memory service, okay, in-memory variable. So that's it from the service explanation perspective. Like code is structured in a way like we have controller, then services, and later if you want to add MongoDB or DynamoDB kind of stuff or database interaction stuff, you can have the DB or repository layer and there you can have that code. But for this demonstration purpose, this is very minimalistic service with a Docker file in it. So Docker file, what the Docker file, let me explain the Docker file. Sorry about that. So Docker file is simply switching to the working directory and taking the package and package log file into the working directory, and then finally triggering the npm install and copying the entire code and finally exposing it. This point is very important. We are exposing this service at port 8080, and we'll later see it in the AWS App Runner that while configuring the health check port, and we will be using this port number. Okay, so and then finally the command to run the service. Okay, so this is how what Node.js service we have built in, and there is nothing fancy. You can see the server.js code. It simply run the service at this host and port number. So next, let's talk about adding the workflow like Github Actions workflow within this service. Okay, so if I go to, first of all, you need to create a .github folder at the root, and then you need to create the workflows folder, so the exact name you have to give, and then you have to add one YAML file. The name of the YAML file can be anything whatsoever, like it should indicate what it's doing, and I'm opening up this file. Okay, now let me close other files as well to make sure that you are able to see it through. So the first, this particular statements, when things are started with on, is nothing but GitHub events, on which events the pipeline should trigger. Okay, because there should be a trigger point for a pipeline, otherwise it will not get triggered, right? You write a function, you never call it, so it will not get called automatically, right? So here this on is saying that once you push the code changes, or once you make a pull request like merged into the main branch, then it will get triggered. So what's this pass ignore is saying that if you are making some changes in the docs folder, adding some document within the docs folder, or making some changes in the .md files, then the code, the pipeline should not trigger. Okay, that's it. So let's scroll down a little bit. So we have configured some environment variable into the GitHub Actions workflow, so which is AWS region. We are targeting the Northeast region. We already stated that why we have done that, because App Runner service is not available in Indian region, in Mumbai region. So we have used this, although we have other regions in which the AWS App Runner is supported. So you can check it out, the documentation, so you will get it. Okay, and then we have a role. This role is basically for GitHub Actions to interact with the AWS environment. Okay, that we also have studied about this in the last session, about in the React deployment session. How do we create this GitHub assume role? We will be talking about this, not in detail, but yes, we will talk about this in this session. Yeah, if you have to go to the detail, you can go and refer to the earlier video on top of this. Okay, now the next is this environment variable, which is necessary in order to get the image from the ECR by the App Runner. Basically, it gives the permission to AWS App Runner to pull the image from the ECR. So we'll see what we have done in order to create this role. And then we have permissions, and this is related to Github OIDC Provider. Otherwise, the interaction between the GitHub Actions and the AWS won't happen if we do not have this configuration. Okay, so you can simply copy paste it into your code. Then we have a job. That job consists of steps basically, and what this does is whenever it starts, actually before it starts executing this pipeline is nothing but a process, a set of steps, okay, that runs in the virtual machine. So it simply says that, okay, I just want to have this operating system Ubuntu installed, and then on that operating system we want a Node.js version of 16.x, and then we will run the steps. Okay, so the first step is to check out the code, which is basically GitHub Actions, which is ready-made actions we are using to check out the code, and then make use of the Node.js 16.x version, and then install that Node.js version, and then install the node modules and npm CI, which will make use of the package log.json file, and to install the node modules. And then we will, this is the build step in order to before actually end up trying to create an image, we first build this application npm run build, and then this action is basically used for GitHub Actions to interact with the AWS. So that's why we are using this action, and entire detail of this entire action is in the last video. You can read through deploying the React app on the AWS with the GitHub Actions. You will be able to see the detailed explanation of this GitHub Actions. But to touch with, we have created a role into the AWS environment, and we are making use of this role in order to get this action working. Okay, so by this action, GitHub will be able to access the AWS environment in order to deploy anything, or in order to access AWS environment. Okay, and then we have a action in order to log into the ECR registry and then able to push the Docker image. And then we have an action to build the Docker image. Here, this is the ECR registry, which will get actually the name of the registry is available with the help of this action. Sorry about that. And then we have created the repository within that registry with the name L40/projects. And then this is up to you to give us any name in the image tag. I have kept as Node.js service dash. This is the basically commit ID, the entire commit ID. And these are the commands in order to build the Docker image, then push the Docker image into the ECR registry, and then finally take that image tag to be used in the subsequent step. Okay. So this step is important. So with this step, what we are saying, we are going to use the AWS App Runner GitHub action. Okay, it is provided by AWS Labs only. Okay, so these guys have created an AWS action in order to get the image deployed into the AWS App Runner environment. Okay, so this is the configuration of the AWS App Runner. Basically, all are the configuration of the AWS App Runner. You can tweak this in later on directly using the AWS console. But here, what we are saying, okay, this name can be anything which will represent this service. So the service name is NodeJS Microservice. The image is the tag that we have created earlier. So with this tag, this particular Docker image will get deployed into the AWS App Runner, and this is the role by which the AWS App Runner should be able to access image from the ECR. Okay, and then the region, the same AWS region, which is Northeast region, and we are saying that one CPU we are going to use 2 memory, like it's a unit basically. Okay. And then we are using the port number as 8080 because we have exposed the Node.js service as 8080 as I shown you earlier. And then these are the waiting time by which it keeps a wait on it until which the application is up. So it keep on waiting until saying that it is failed for the timeout. Okay, and then finally we are showing up the App Runner URL which will get exposed by the App Runner onto the GitHub Actions workflow console, so that we can make use of it in order to actually trigger the application. Okay, so I just want to show you the README file before I actually jump onto the environment, GitHub account or AWS. So in this README file, you simply say that in the local, if you have to run this code into the local, you have to just use npm run start. And if you want to invoke this, you can use curl in the localhost 8080. This is the outcome of that service. We simply have dummy users as a JSON response. And if you want to run it with the Docker in the local, we can simply build it with the Docker build -t command and run it on port 9000, and we can use it like this in the local with the Docker image. Okay, and then we have App Runner. When we App Runner expose the URL, then it will look like this. Okay, the URL looks like this, and you can simply make a curl request onto this URL in order to get the response back. Okay, so yeah, so let me go to the board and show you the application up and running. Okay, let me open this. So this is the AWS App Runner service. I've already opened into the AWS console, and I'm sitting on the North Virginia region, and this service is named as Node.js Microservice. And first thing is important, like manually I did not create anything in the AWS console. Everything is created from scratch by this GitHub Actions into the AWS environment. Okay, once the pipeline runs, it will automatically create and provision the AWS App Runner instance and deploy this service as name as Node.js Microservice into this environment. Okay, so what is inside? Before that, let's go to the code. So this is the GitHub code. Once I push the code from the local, so it will look like this in the GitHub repo. Okay, so and then once, because of the GitHub workflow, it will trigger the GitHub Actions. And let me go to the GitHub Actions. I'm not the it's not a there are a lot of iterations until which I am able to get it running. So if you look into this code, let me show you this fixed port one. This I've actually added the git path ignore later on. So but this is the last one which is actually working fine for me. And let me go and open this pipeline. So you see that every other step within this pipeline is working and it's successful. So we have all the steps over here, and in this step we have deployed to AWS deploy app runner image, and finally we have the app runner URL showing up over here. Okay, so this is the one which I have added in the README file. Okay, now in order to get this working, the most important thing is two roles. One is the GitHub Actions using a role to access AWS. Second is the AWS App Runner role to access image from the ECR. Okay, so both of these roles, let me walk you through before I actually land up on the AWS App Runner. Let me open the IAM in the AWS in the new tab. Okay, let me go to the roles, GitHub Assume role. This is the role I have created for GitHub Actions to interact with the AWS for Github OIDC Provider. Okay, so in this we have two type of policies. One is the trust relationship, which is a trust policy. I created this policy so that GitHub Actions can access basically AWS. So this is a trust policy, which is assume role with web identity, and we have to add it as sts.amazonaws.com. And then this is important. What we are saying that this repo, learn for Turkey repo, should have access to AWS whenever there is any workflow triggered within the learn for Turkey repo, then only it should be able to access AWS environment, otherwise not. Okay, this star resembles the name of the you can say repo, and this is the username. This is the name of the repo, which is star. Any repo within this user account learn for Turkey will be able to access AWS environment, and this star is actually the branch name. You can replace it with the actual branch name. Okay, so and then we have the permission policies. So in the permission policies in this exercise, we do not require CloudFront cache. This was needed for React application. We do not require GitHub S3 upload, again needed for the React application. In this exercise, we need ECR push image policy. We need this policy. Let me open this policy. So in this policy, we are targeting that GitHub repo. So we have mentioned the ARN of that particular ECR repository, sorry, not GitHub repo, and all those actions, action as a permission. Okay, and then we have this GitHub Actions access app runner policy, which is needed in order to get the GitHub Actions access the AWS App Runner to list down few of the things before it end up executing the GitHub Actions service. Okay, GitHub in order to access the AWS App Runner. Okay, and then we have the AWS App Runner full access. Basically, this is permission is added because it was failing in one of a GitHub workflow, saying that service linked role could not be created by the GitHub Actions into the AWS environment because it was the first time the App Runner service is getting deployed. So that problem was there, so I have added this policy into this role. Okay, so this is one of a role you need to make sure that. So this particular role I have added as a in this. If you go into the code, this particular role is added here in this line number 17. Okay, and this particular role, line number 18 role, let me show you quickly, is added here as access app runner access ECR. Okay, this role is added here, access ECR. So with the help of this policy, permission policy, AWS App Runner will be able to access ECR in order to pull the image from it and get it deployed. Okay, so these two roles are important to get your pipeline up and running. Okay, and then let me go to the AWS App Runner window where the service is deployed, and talking about the AWS App Runner configuration. Okay, so the service name is NodeJS Microservice, the status is running, and this is the domain, this is the URL published or created by AWS App Runner. The incoming traffic is public because we want that to be accessible from the internet. If you want it accessible from within the AWS environment, you can configure it as private. And yes, let me go to the Node.js Microservice. Inside this, what options given by AWS App Runner service? We can see the logs directly here. We can also see it from the CloudWatch view in CloudWatch. Basically, it is integrated with CloudWatch as a logging service, and then we can see the activity over here, what all activities are there, like whatever actions I'm doing. I have paused this service yesterday night and resume it today. So all these actions are recorded over here, and then we have the metrics. You can see the metrics, the request count, etc., landing onto the service, etc. Everything is visible over here. and we have the observability. So you can configure it with the X-ray, AWS X-ray, to see all those tracing related stuff for the AWS App Runner service. And this is very important tab, configuration. Over there, if you see, we have the configuration, some of the configuration applied with the help of Github Actions for the App Runner. Over here, the same configuration, we can update it once the deployment step is completed. Then we can configure, we can edit over here if you want to increase the CPU and memory, if you want to change the port, if you want to change the health configuration, we can do it from here. We can also change the auto scaling configuration from here to support multiple concurrency requests, etc. This is a health check one. Then we have the security requirement over here. So this is networking. We can have public or make it private. And finally, we have observability. And one more thing I would like to add, like this App Runner service, we can also state VPC subnet detail to the App Runner service so that it will get associated with the VPC and the subnet. And we can also talk with other services within the AWS environment like Redis or DynamoDB, etc. via App Runner service. So there are a lot of things we can do. So it is not limited service. It's very, you can say, mature service to use with. So I would urge that. So to start with, like if you want to experiment something and if you want to, so there is no need to provision EC2 instances, there is no need to provision AWS load balancers or scaling groups, or even if you want to talk about EKS, etc. there is no need to, so there is very less of a hassle and more of an outcome. So let's you start making use of this service for your upcoming project. So yeah, so this is what we have learned. So whatever changes, if we push any change over here, so the action will get triggered and the deployment will get triggered over here. If you want to, if you want me to show that, so let me just make some change in the code. Suppose I'm changing the name over here. If I'm changing the name over here to say Rajat and commit it. Sorry, Rajat is already there. If I am to change this to Ravi and commit it, save it, and do the git add dot and then git push command. So I'm just making changes. Sorry, I did not make a commit. Before that, I'm trying to push it. So let me just commit it, update user, and then git push command. Okay, let me just scroll it up, git push command. Okay, so that way I made some changes over here. I'm pushing the change into the GitHub repo, and if you see in the pipeline, if I go to the actions, you will be able to see the pipeline get triggers, and it will try to build the image, push it into the ECR, and then the deployment starts at the AWS App Runner site. So one thing to note, like if you are doing it for the first time in the AWS App Runner, so you need to be a little patient. Like it may take 5 to 10 minutes to get the application up for the first time, and then it will be very fast, like to do that stuff. So yeah, so if you go to inside it, you will be able to see what all steps are actually running, and you will get the image created and the deployment started. When the deployment started, it waits. If you come back here, I think you should be able to see what is going on. So operation in progress. And you will see once the operation is done, it will say up and running, and then you will be able to see over here the deployment is over, and you will get the URL URL shown to you. Okay, you can also attach the custom domain. If you go there, if you have already having the existing domain, you can simply attach it over here and make use of it. So that's how it works. So yeah, so that's it for this session. So I hope you understand the basic concepts of why the AWS App Runner comes into play and how to deploy the Node.js microservice into the Github Action into the AWS App Runner with the help of Github Actions. So hope it makes sense to you and you are able to understand, you are able to learn from it. So if you still have any queries, do post your queries into the comment section. If you really like this video, do click on like button, share this video as much as you can, and it gives me boost to make such videos going forward. So thank you so much for watching this video and staying with me. So yeah, till then, bye bye.